Welcome to the Lights, Camera, Action Entertainment Reviews Podcast.
The world is changed. Much that once was is lost. For none now live who remember it. History became legend. Legend became myth. And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost.
Our Lord of the Rings retrospective begins.
It has now been found.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my axe. Carry the fate of us all, little one.
We're coming too!
Mr. Frodo's not going anywhere without me.
You will face evil, and you will defeat it.
On this episode, we will be discussing and reviewing The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Are you frightened?
Yes.
Not nearly frightened enough.
This episode will contain spoilers. Listener discretion is advised.
There will be no dawn for men.
And now, here are your hosts for this episode. Mike Winkler, Alister Englehart, and Daniel English. All right, hello everybody, and welcome to Lights, Camera, Action Entertainment Reviews Podcast. I am Mike Winkler, and I am here again with Alister Englehart, and a special guest today for the Lord of the Rings retrospective, Daniel English. Nice to have you, Dan.
Hey, thanks.
All right, guys. Well, been really wanting to do Lord of the Rings for a long time, especially these extended cuts, because I've never seen them before, so I'm kind of watching them little by little, trying to piece together what I don't remember being in the movie and what I do. So it's kind of thing for me. You guys are more the Lord of the Rings experts than me, so I'll be interested, to kind of hear your guys' take on everything and what everything that was added that you guys know of.
Sure. If there's ever a trilogy that's binge-worthy in the current state of things, it's Lord of the Rings, for sure.
Exactly. So today we're going to be doing Fellowship of the Ring. We'll break these down, little by little with each individual episode. So what do you guys want to divulge into first with this?
I guess maybe just to start out question, what was everybody's favorite moment in the movie?
Ooh, yeah, I was going to say, how did you like it?
I could definitely tell where there were parts that were extended, because I noticed like the slowdown periods based on the pacing from the regular edition. But I liked it though, because I think it gave it time for the characters to kind of get fleshed out even more, and kind of get to know them better as the trilogy goes on. And I'm really interested to see going forward the other extended stuff. Do the extended cuts get better with each movie?
They definitely get longer. Yeah, they definitely get longer. I was looking it up this morning to see how many minutes was added to each of the films. There was only 30 minutes added to Fellowship, but there was I think 41 added to the Two Towers, and then almost 55 minutes, I want to say, added to the Return of the King. I'm trying to think back to the Two Towers and Return of the King. I felt like for the Fellowship, most of the content that was added in the extended edition almost I felt like was for rewatchers. Like it kind of alluded to content that wouldn't really be up and coming until the later movies. Like for instance, Aragorn, when he was visiting his mother's grave, and he has or her memorial while they were in Rivendell. And he's reflecting on his call to be on his calling as the heir of Isildur, the true heir to the throne. And I think that doesn't really come around too much otherwise in the Fellowship, but it's certainly a huge theme in Return of the King. And so I remember when I watched it for the first time that it was really cool to kind of understand a bit more of where that was going. After having kind of seen the theatrical editions of all three films. So
See, it's been, like I said before we started, it's been so long that I've seen the normal edition. I didn't even know that memorial scene in Rivendell was extra. What the most of the ones I remember for me give context of the ring and the coming to understanding of the ring, because I know that first scene where Isildur gets shot off his horse into the water. You can even see the the effects dulled down for that scene, and it doesn't look quite as polished.
Yeah.
And then I think there's another one where Gandalf is researching the ring in that one
At Minas Tirith.
in the library. And so it's kind of, I like the extended scenes in Fellowship specifically because they just give you so much more context. And again, later on in the trilogy, you'll see a lot more about Smeagol and Smeagol's devolving into Gollum. I've always loved the extended, and I'm one of those people that says, if it's not the extended, it's not Lord of the Rings.
I agree, because I think it's kind of something I almost wish Harry Potter would have done, because there was so much in Harry Potter that was, of course, not from the books and the movies. And I think the only two movies that they released extended versions on were Chamber of Secrets and Sorcerer's Stone, but even then there was still a lot of content missing. And I like that Lord of the Rings took the time and basically shot everything from the books and gave the fans this completeness of this whole trilogy, because the theatrical cuts, for as good as they are, the extended cuts just they're just the proper versions. And I know even Peter Jackson himself has said they're not really his director's cuts. He prefers the cuts he put together, but he put the extended versions together because he wanted to do it for the fans. And he wanted the fans to be able to experience the books in movie form.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I was watching the theatrical edition of The Fellowship recently with a friend of mine that had never seen any of the movies, which was so sad, but was still so much fun to watch it through with him for the first time. It was neat. But
wow,
one of the scenes that I recognized that became exceedingly short to me when I watched the theatrical edition was the interaction between Galadriel and the Fellowship right after.
Yes. Because she doesn't give her parting gifts, right?
Right.
I thought that scene might have been extended. It felt like it.
Yeah. And I think that's really helpful. When I was watching Return of the King a few years back, I remember recognizing that the only reason that I knew what that the Light of Arendelle was because of that extended scene in the Fellowship. They kind of glaze over it, and all of a sudden in the Return of the King, if you've only seen the theatrical edition, you're like, what is this? What's this vial? All of a sudden has. So I thought that was a pretty neat scene, and even that they discuss a little bit of what lembas bread is, right? So in the theatrical edition, they get to that in Two Towers, and they're talking about this stuff called lembas bread that we saw. We saw these pieces of bread wrapped in leaves, but didn't really know their attributes in any way. So I thought that was
is
cool.
enough to fill a grown man's stomach.
Right.
I love it. And then
how many did you eat?
4. That was great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's two things. The first thing is, I feel like that scene in particular, as I was watching this most recent time to prep for this, it reminds me of the kind of rhythm that the Marvel movies are able to achieve, which is some really weighty and difficult concepts, some really dark trials, but then just sprinkling this playfulness throughout. I think, when they're walking through the woods and Gimli's like talking about his prowess, and then all of a sudden all the elves are upon them, and they're like, the dwarf breathes so loud we could shoot him, we could hit him in the dark, or whatever they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's just this back and forth between, Gandalf had just died, or fell into shadow, and so we were bummed, but I really love the way they're able to do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny you say balance too, because my two favorite scenes in all of Fellowship is, of course, anything in the Shire. I love everything in the Shire. Just anything between the set design and the characters and the music and how cheery and happy it is. And then my other favorite part is the stuff in the mines, because it's the dark stuff of the movie. You get Gandalf's death. You get the epic battle scenes. You get that scene where you think that Frodo's been stabbed. And he has the vest on. Just those two scenes are ultimately my favorite because they have a good balance of light and dark. Throughout the film.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite part, Al?
Well, it would be a toss up between two scenes. Either actually, the first one was only in the movie; it was not in the books, or at least the way that the dialogue fell. It was between Boromir and Aragorn, right when Boromir was dying. Where he basically, after all this tension between him and Aragorn over the course of the film, and in the end, ironically recognizes Aragorn's true calling even before Aragorn himself is willing to accept it, when he says, my brother, my captain, my king.
That's great. That's pretty good.
And like I said, it's funny because it's not in the books. It's such a beautiful scene, but it was actually written out a little bit differently by Tolkien. But that was actually one of the moments that I really liked what the scriptwriters did a lot. And I thought that was a really touching scene. So that would be one. The other one, which I feel like, Dan, I know you have an affinity for, is actually in the mines, Mike, that you're mentioning when
Gandalf chastises Frodo.
When Frodo says it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance. And Gandalf is like, pity? It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. I forget the exact dialogue from that point until the end point, but I especially loved
something like, there are many who die that deserve life, and many who live who deserve death. Will you give it to them? Yeah.
And then he says, my heart still tells me that Gollum has a part to play in all this. And I just think that's one of the best foreshadowing moments of the entire trilogy, is when he says that, because it was without Gollum, Middle Earth would have been lost. So I think those are my two favorites. But what about you?
That's one of my favorites too. I would say anytime Gandalf, he's my favorite character. He has such great one-liners, especially in the Fellowship. He just exudes such a subtle power. And he also, in Fellowship, his maybe senility is amusing to me. Like, he's I love the moments too that get memeified, like when he walks into the mines and he looks and he's like, I have no memory of this place. And I've seen put the subtitle on it when you load a game you haven't played in forever. I just love Gandalf, and I particularly love when he confronts Saruman. And he because he's going to him as the head of the order, and he just senses that he's corrupted, and he tries to reason with him, but then he's convicted and he acts in accordance with it. It's just like that incorruptible character.
Yeah. I almost feel like that there are times that Gandalf comes off borderline senile through most of this movie.
Yeah. Oh, that's Fellowship for sure.
Yeah.
He's just kind of forgetful. I mean, to think that the Ring of Power was under his nose from the journey in the first movie and so in the book too, Bilbo's birthday goes, and then I think there's 20-30 years or something like that between the birthday party and them actually setting off out of the Shire.
Wow. The movie does make it look very like a very short time frame between when he leaves for Minas Tirith and then when he comes back. But
in the books it's quite a while, and so the ring is just sitting there unbeknownst to Gandalf.
This was the first time that I actually had watched this movie since I saw all the Hobbits. So I saw Bilbo in a whole different light now knowing his story, seeing his story on screen. Now, I wanted to ask your guys' opinion. There's a lot of toss-ups and controversies about the Hobbit trilogy total. You know, what were your guys' thoughts on it? I think it kind of lived up to it, or was it feel disappointing?
The Hobbit?
Yeah.
Oh, you can go first, Dan. Have you seen it?
Yeah. The way I would say it is The Hobbit is such a fantastic story that you can't escape it being at least a little bit good, because the fundamental elements of The Hobbit are just so beautifully written. Just the temptation of one's own self into, like, I think they call it gold sickness, when Thorin is just corrupted by his greed. I also think that they captured playful elements pretty well. Some of my favorite scenes are what I've heard are people's least favorites. I love the barrel scene. I love the barrel
with
scene.
Bobber.
Yeah,
that's
I just like the scenes that are playful. Overall, though, I was really disappointed in the trilogy. I didn't feel like it needed to be a trilogy. I think the character of the Hobbit is totally different than Fellowship. And it should have, Lord of the Rings, it shouldn't have been this long, drawn-out epic. I think it should have been a lot more playful and a little bit more transparently moralistic. And they shouldn't have had Legolas in it. And they shouldn't.
Yeah, that was forced.
Yeah, it really was. I think there's these pictures of Peter Jackson just sitting on the Hobbit set looking so depressed. And I think he must have just been overwhelmed with the task that they had given him. But yeah, I kind of love-hate the Hobbits. That was probably a longer answer than I needed to give, but I love parts of it. I loved seeing the story of the Hobbit on the big screen, but ultimately I was disappointed. I don't know if you remember Mr. Myers. You remember the 4th grade teacher, Mr. Myers?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So he read Hobbit to us in his class.
That's cool.
And then he created that board game that he had on his board. He might have even called it Dunedain or something like that. And throughout the course of the year, you would play a Tolkien-esque board game, and the class was split up into different groups, and he would read us The Hobbit once a week. I loved The Hobbit so much, I asked him to borrow a copy. You know, a couple years later, my mom got me the book on tape. I just loved seeing it, but I don't think it lived up to what I wanted from it.
Well, it's interesting too, because you mentioned about Peter Jackson feeling depressed on set. Actually, come to find out, Peter Jackson wasn't supposed to direct any of the Hobbits. It was supposed to be Guillermo del Toro, who did Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy, and he also ended up dropping out at the last minute. I don't really know why or understand why.
I think it was to a video game.
Okay.
Huh.
I know he stayed on as producer. And I think that Peter Jackson just didn't want to do this. I think he felt like there was no way in hell that the Lord of the Rings was going to live up to, or Hobbit was going to live up to Lord of the Rings. Right. So, but you're right. The trilogy seemed unnecessary. And I can't even believe there's even extended versions of all 3 of those movies, because it just, like you said, it feels like a lot of unneeded stuff that needed to be there. Didn't need to be there. What about you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Dan. I think I wonder how it would have been if I had seen the Hobbit trilogy first and then Lord of the Rings. I was just captivated so much by the Lord of the Rings trilogy that I think the Hobbit was just a little bit of a letdown. So maybe if it had been in reverse order, it would have been better than it was of an experience. I almost felt like for me, I think about how DC did the Batman trilogy with Christian Bale, and how they were very serious compared to Marvel's films, and how I actually felt like that was more successful than what I feel like they're trying to do with their new films, which is to introduce an element of humor to kind of mimic what Marvel has been doing, because it's been successful. I felt like The Hobbit. Granted, I think the book, I'd have to go back, and I haven't read The Hobbit in a long time, but I feel like the book itself, if I'm remembering correctly, did take on a slightly lighter tone than the the books themselves, so I can get that. But I don't know. It like I said, it was hard for me to go from a trilogy that I felt like what you were mentioning earlier, Dan, that the comedic relief was kind of sprinkled tastefully, or in a way that was like it was a good rhythm for me, and then for it to be just a bit more overt with the Hobbit. So
and again, they had to manufacture 3 arcs that were not present in the Hobbit. They took a story that could have been maybe 2. I mean, they could have revealed Smaug and then gone into the takeover and the corruption in the second movie. But just to split it into 3, I think they had to manufacture things that just weren't there.
I did love Smaug. I loved Cumberbatch.
I did too. And I think they did the dwarves really well too. I loved how different they all looked.
Yeah.
The temptation for me would be to have them all look the same. Just because they're short and stocky, but they did such a good job giving them all unique characters and looks. But yeah.
I mean, have you noticed that Cumberbatch is good in almost anything he's put into? Like, look at all the franchises he's been inserted into. For Doctor Strange for Marvel, he was Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness, and then here, Smaug. You know, he just and any franchise he gets inserted into, he steals a lot of what he's in. He just steals the screen.
Yeah. Sherlock.
Yeah, Sherlock also.
And I loved him in Imitation Game.
Yes. He's fantastic.
He just plays a conceited intellect really well. Like
that's right. You nailed it right on the head. That's true.
Yeah.
So which member of the cast do you feel like really stole the show in Fellowship?
Ooh. You know, I love Ian McKellen because, like Dan said, I mean, Gandalf, any scene he's in, any dialogue he gives, he steals every scene he's in. I mean, pretty much. Have you guys seen those videos going around? Do you guys have TikTok?
No.
I know what they are. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what videos I'm talking about, Al? They people keep putting these computer screens up, and it's just Gandalf bobbing his head like this in the beginning of the movie. Yeah, sure. I've been seeing those all over TikTok lately, and but yeah, I think Gandalf and that's why when his character, when he dies in the movie, the movie's missing something in that last half hour, 35 minutes. You can definitely tell something's missing.
Yeah. Oof. I would tend to agree with Mike, just because Gandalf has the best lines. Gandalf has the best arc. Gandalf's the most changed. He when the Fellowship splits, I feel like he is a unifying factor for a lot of the different threads of the story. If not Gandalf, though, I think it might be Gimli.
I have to agree.
What's that actor's name? Who plays him?
I have no idea.
Let me find out. Gimli.
He's a quite tall Scottish guy, I think.
Here we go. John Rhys Davies.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen him in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
This time around, I was really amused when they're having the secret council at Rivendell, and they're all like arguing. Everyone has at least semi-legitimate concerns about the future of the ring, and all Gimli cares about is that it's not heralded by elves. Yeah. And so he's just kind of an absurd character. The way that he falls in love with Galadriel, the way.
Yeah, what'd you think of that? The 3 strands of hair. I was going to ask because that was another extended scene.
Yeah, it's not funny, but it's
endearing.
I don't know. It's comical almost.
Yeah.
Creepy.
It's not
creepy
treated,
in a way.
So it's really strange. Yeah. It's like Legolas is like, oh, how nice. And I know that they're slowly shifting it so that they're going to build a friendship between Legolas and Gimli. But if the characters weren't there being like, oh, that's so nice. She is fair. What nice hairs she's given you. We would all be like, this is ridiculous. What a
you just see him sitting in a boat fiddling with his hairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Jeez.
And she laughs with all class. She could have called him a creep.
I would have liked to have seen the scene where he asked for those hairs.
Yeah.
I would have liked that.
Yeah, he's just kind of muttering. Yeah, you're right.
But I do agree. Gimli, yeah, I agree. He does steal the movie. If it's not for Gandalf, it's definitely Gimli for sure.
Yeah.
So I know this would be, well, Mike, I feel like for you this might be an easier question, but for Dan and I, since it's been a while since we've seen the extended first, what was the most surprising to you that happened in the movie? What was the most surprising moment?
Do you mean like what I hadn't seen before in the extended version, or you mean just when I saw the movie the first time?
Or even the first time? Yeah. With the theatrical edition.
I remember when I saw the theatrical version, I had not read the books yet, so I didn't know that Gandalf was gonna die in that moment. So I remember that being really shocking to me, and I was really floored by that because Gandalf was one of my favorite characters, and I was like, wow, he's gone. Yeah. So he's not in the next two. That sucks. So when he reappeared in Two Towers, I was beyond happy.
Yeah.
Definitely had to be that scene for sure.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
It's hard to think back. Do I remember a time before I saw Fellowship of the Ring? I mean that seems like the total obvious answer. I still have not read the trilogy in its entirety.
Neither have I. Yeah.
I've read Fellowship and I've gotten about halfway through Two Towers. And so I had not read the books because I had read The Hobbit long before the movies came out, obviously, and there were a couple cartoon adaptations that were pretty good. But so I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going on. So even thinking through the first time, something as simple as Saruman's not really good, or Gandalf falls into shadow, or Boromir goes for the ring. I think the the twists and turns are so plausible and they're so well done that none of it is outlandish or contrived. And I eventually will have to talk about this at greater length, but this movie ages so well. What was it, 2001 or something?
Yeah, 2001, 2002.
Watching an 18-year-old movie, and there are a few scenes where you can tell that they're using like green screen technology. But the writing is so good. The only thing that ages terribly for me is the slow motion that they really anytime Frodo is falling into the power of the ring, it's like, oh, and it slows way down. The pacing for that's
I don't know if it's Elijah Wood's acting there or it's just the way that it's shot. I don't know what it is, but you're exactly right. Slow-mo at that time was really bad because I think that the first slow-mo movie was The Matrix back in '99. Yeah. So, I mean, they were relatively new effects, but you're right. Those were probably the most cringeworthy parts of the movie.
Like when the ring flies up at the prancing pony.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the worst one is when the Witch King is riding over them in the city right outside Minas Tirith. Is it Minas Tirith? I forget where they are. Maybe it's Osgiliath. When Frodo's about to put the ring on, right before they get to the steps.
I think you're right. Osgiliath, I think.
Yeah, Faramir decides to let them go.
Yeah, that's Osgiliath. Yep.
And as he's flying over them, it's another 10 minutes of slow motion of Frodo almost putting the ring on. What was your surprising part, Al?
Well, I were being really surprised actually at the interaction between Aragorn and Frodo because it wasn't in the book.
Oh, really?
At the very end, where Aragorn closes his hand. Yeah, closes his hand and is like, "I would have gone to the end." It's not in the book.
That's right, because Fellowship's the only book that I've read, and you're right. That is not in the book.
Yeah, the only moment that was the moment when he left Frodo in the book was the moment when Pippin and Merry were taken, and he realized that he couldn't go with Frodo to Mordor, that he was going to go after them instead.
Right. Okay.
So it was interesting. I mean, I was thinking about it Like last time I watched it with my buddy Justin, I'm like, why did they? I was thinking back to it. I'm like, why did they change that? Or like, what was the motivation for making that change to his character? Because I could see how maybe he would have been concerned about the way that Boromir was tempted, and maybe seen the same potential in himself to be tempted in the same way to take the ring. But I don't know. It just even
I think
so,
that's for the viewer.
Yeah.
How Hollywood moment, you know. that they
Yeah,
had
I
from
think
books.
that's an establishment of Aragorn's character in contrast to everyone else. Because, I mean, really, only the strongest, most noble characters resist the temptation of the ring. And then, of course, like a slew of hobbits because of some racial, illness. You know what I mean? Like they have like
Mental
a race
endurance.
stat. Yeah.
We can't offend the short people. I guess that's the motto.
Because, like, if you think about it, well, and the elves too, but
Oh, that's true.
okay. So Boromir, really, the sons of the Steward of Gondor are really the only guys that you have to worry about. But I do think that's just to say, Aragorn is noble and he is above the temptation of the ring, which, I mean, that's a foreshadow to him.
Yeah. How he would do exactly what his heir or Isildur did not. Is that,
Right.
Is that what I mean?
Yeah, how in
sure.
his because he even says that when he's talking to Arwen. Well, she kind of brings what she thinks he's thinking about to the fore, and she says, you're not your father. You're not your. What's the lineage on there? Aragorn's what, 80 some years old?
I don't know. I know what you mean,
what is his
because he's a
age?
Dunedain. You're right. He's
Yeah.
older, but he looks younger than he is. Yeah. Let's see.
But
I know
Aragorn was
for-
87. 87 years
87.
old.
Okay.
Yeah.
he's like
that's
Moses.
Now,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the 3 movies.
Yeah.
Which one is the best?
Oh gosh.
Because I'm going to start here because I have a pet peeve, and I always hear people arguing about whether it's Two Towers or Return of the King.
In terms of storyline?
Yeah.
Just in general, which is people's favorites, because my buddy was doing a 10 days 10 movies thing, and he posted the picture where Gandalf had ridden over the ridge into Helm's Deep with the light, and brings the Riders of Rohan in to kind of finish that battle up. Spoiler alert, I guess. And then he and his cousin were having a conversation. Oh, which one's your favorite? Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, or Two Towers? And he called me out. He's like, oh, Dan's going to be reading this saying Fellowship is underrated. And I cannot say that enough. The Fellowship is so underrated. It's such a good movie.
Uh-huh.
So I think that one's the best. That's why I bring that up.
Yeah. So what do you feel like people see in the other two that causes them to elevate it? Is it the battle scenes?
The battle.
Yeah, it's got to be
Sure.
the battle scenes.
Well,
Sure. I mean,
and
that's
the
why I
battle
love
on the ridge is not even in the book.
Mhm.
So the only actual battle in Fellowship was not even in the trilogy.
Mm.
And it's just not about the battles. And I'm
Sure.
okay with that. I think the Fellowship has more levity than the others because they really do get quite dark.
Yeah.
Oh, very much, especially Two Towers.
Yeah. I would say it's probably the battles.
Sure. I mean, that's what made me love Empire Strikes Back as a kid, was the Hoth battle. I could have watched that battle over and over again, and then throughout the rest of the movie. As a kid, I loved the Hoth battle so much. Not throwing it out. I'm just saying the battles were what captivated me.
Did you ever play that N64 Star Wars game?
Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, it
Yes.
starts on Hoth, and you're riding
Oh.
that little ship with the cable out the back, and you
Snowspeeders.
you wrap it around the AT-AT. Oh man, it's fun.
It's funny you say that too, because you know what, Star Wars is one of those debates you could have too about the same thing with trilogies, because now that you got 3 Star Wars trilogies, you could have a debate about each trilogy, which one's the best one in each trilogy.
Yeah.
And I mean I guess for Lord of the Rings, for me, There is something really special about Fellowship. I think with especially everything in the Shire. I love everything in the Shire very much so. I guess for the overall entertainment value, I guess my favorite probably would be Return of the King. But I'm with you, Dan, a lot though, because Fellowship, there is kind of something special there because you're getting to know each character, you're getting to know the world around them, you're getting to study and get to see Middle Earth and get to know everyone. And by the time we get into Two Towers and Return of the King, it's all about the journey and the action. And the first movie is all about that development, and that does make Fellowship rather special.
Mm-hmm. I think what I like best about Fellowship, or well, I guess if I'm choosing a criteria in terms of character development, I love Fellowship most for the development of Sam's character, who is also my favorite hero. Because I feel like at the end of Fellowship, when Sam is willing to sacrifice his own life, albeit to
prove a point.
Well,
yeah.
I was
That's my least favorite Sam moment that you just
Really?
brought up, when he's like, I can't swim. I don't mean to. I don't mean to belittle Sam. Mariah loves Sam too, and maybe that's why I get a little angry, because I feel a competition with Samwise Gamgee. But no, he's such a good friend. I never understood that part, but at the same time, I think Frodo would have left him behind if he didn't do that. So
it's a very I think that was a moment when typically I feel like his self-sacrificial moments are tempered with a rational side.
Yeah.
And I think it went out to he didn't have it in that point. Yeah.
I think there's a concept too in Fellowship that might be lost in modern times, and that's just the idea of being duty bound.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Sam's word is his bond, and throughout the entire series, he feels compelled to watch out for Frodo. Yes, because they're friends and he's his companion, but also because of what he promised, and I don't mean to, so there is something honorable and admirable about that.
Yeah.
Since you guys know what was mainly added to the extended cuts pretty well, what were your guys' favorite additions, and what were your cringeworthy worst additions to the movie?
Ooh, cringeworthy.
Yeah.
Well, I guess in addition to the scene I mentioned earlier with the expansion on Galadriel's gift giving, I really liked the additional lore we were given at the beginning with Hobbits and the Shire.
Yeah.
I felt like that gave us more of a I feel like it just gives you more appreciation for what they're doing as Frodo and Sam, because they're these, you just see how simple their lives were, and contextually I feel like for someone like Aragorn, who's already rough, he's a survivalist, he's already been doing this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The burden of carrying the ring in some ways wouldn't have been quite as heroic for me as someone like Frodo and Sam, because you see how utterly different their lives are from what they quickly become,
right?
And what they have to give up in terms of comfort and what's known to them in order to take on this task of carrying the ring. So I really liked that addition. I'm trying to think. I'm in terms of cringing, I mean, there wasn't anything that I felt like I didn't enjoy edition wise. What I guess there were omissions that were disappointing to me. One was that they didn't include Tom Bombadil, who I always liked. And the other, which again, I wish almost for the sake of having some additional continuity with the Hobbit trilogy, was Radagast. Because there's actually an interaction between Radagast and Gandalf in the book when Gandalf starts to sense that things are amok, where he warns Radagast of what's going on. And I just thought that would have been kind of a cool introduction to the Order, which we eventually see with Sauron. But I feel like that could have filled out some of the details about their Order a little bit more. But I don't know. Was there anything that you didn't like, Dan?
In Fellowship, probably not. I don't think you could lose a single second of the extended edition. I'm trying. I obviously don't quite remember exactly, so I'm looking at the scenes that were extended, and it's quite a few, and I don't recognize them all by name. But then the entirely new scenes are concerning hobbits, a scene called "At the Green Dragon," the Path of the Elves, the Midgewater Marches, and Gilrain's Memorial. I don't know. It's not that I dislike the elves, but sometimes I think there might be too much to that. Maybe if I had to pick.
Oh, like the scene where they see the wood elves passing on to the Undying Lands, or
that scene didn't seem entirely necessary.
It's funny. It's I don't know what that was for. It was from the book, so that it at least had that going for itself. But it did seem a little bit oddly placed. I feel like the only real value it can one of the two values that I see of that is that they gave you a sense of Frodo's knowledge of Middle Earth, or I guess that somehow
which he probably inherited from Bilbo.
From Bilbo, right. But other than that, I mean, I feel like the background we get to the Undying Lands once they reach Rivendell in kind of the Arwen story arc was probably sufficient. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that is, if I had to pick one, probably my scene too.
Yeah, it just seems like there's some of the stuff with the elves could have been lost. It seemed like some of it was too long in parts. But I mean, in Fellowship is as a whole, I mean, watching it, I didn't really see anything that stuck out as bad or as cringeworthy or thing. There's that one scene you mentioned with the elves walking. That scene felt out of place. It felt a little weird, and I knew right away when that scene came up that was definitely new. And I'm like, this just doesn't feel right. The things were moving, and then all of a sudden the pacing just stopped for a second, and then jumped to a new scene. It just felt weird. But I mean, as a whole, I know I've seen a lot of extended cuts of a lot of different movies, and I've seen some pretty bad extended cuts where like the pacing seems off. It almost feels like they just threw deleted material into the movie for the sake of doing it. I think this is like one of the first extended cuts where I've watched where everything just felt right. It just felt like the movie belonged this way even in the theater. That there shouldn't have been a director's cut. This should have been the director's cut, the releasing cut. I don't know how
that might be one of the advantages of having such a rich textual background. Sure. I mean, it's no secret that J.R. Tolkien is a world builder. He didn't just write Lord of the Rings. He didn't just write The Hobbit. There's a whole world with languages. I mean, it's akin to, well, flip it around. Game of Thrones is akin to that, in that you get the sense, we can add an extra 3 minutes about hobbits here because it's all there in the book, and they're singing, and they have books that they read, and so I think there's a richness there that you can draw from that. Whereas maybe in movies, I watched this interview where a guy talked about something as simple as I forget the name of the movie, but the kids had coats on for some reason and they were inside, and his interview was about, as a director, sometimes you're just putting out fires and solving problems. And you could probably speak to that, Mike, where you're like, well, the scene before this, they had their coats on, or we got to get them outside right after this, so we just need this to happen. And then you kind of find a way to make it all fit logically. Whereas hopefully with Lord of the Rings, you have such a sturdy base that you're really just bringing to life a story that already exists.
I'm very obsessive about that kind of thing, because especially when I'm in the editing room and I'll see a take. I mean, if I have an angle that something was out of place and I'm not going to go back and reshoot it, I will literally do myself a favor and I will crop it out of the frame just so I can't see it. Nobody else might notice it, but I'll notice it, and that will drive me nuts. I mean, ask Alister when he's filming a scene. how I'll do certain things, or I'll put them in a certain spot, and if something's not right, I'm going to say, nope, got to do it again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We do a lot of angles. It's
Yep.
fun.
It is.
Yeah. So here's one thing I remember about back when the movies were coming out. What an anticipation we all had to see Gollum. Because if you remember, all we see of him in Fellowship of the Ring is when he's being tortured.
Yep.
And then again when he's creeping after them in the Mines of Moria. And you kind of see his eyes backlit in the dark. I remember being so excited to see how they did Gollum. I don't know, just a thought I thought I'd share.
Yeah, he's very heavily teased.
Yeah. Did you all feel like when did you all see the cartoon version of The Hobbit? It's really old.
No.
No, okay, that's okay.
Where they took out the giant, right?
I forget. Well, I just was curious. When did you have any sense of what Gollum would be like in terms of kind of that inner division when you first saw the Fellowship? Like, did you have an inkling that there was kind of like a softer, almost like a not human, but yeah, just a softer side to him? Or what did he seem like? He seemed like a pretty dark character, sort of like he was in the cartoon Hobbit.
Well, so he was almost comical in the book. And so I remember this illustration of Gollum in the book that I had, and it was almost a silhouette of him hunched over on this rock cliff. I'm searching Google for it now, but I just remember thinking he looked scary. But yeah, they did such a good job of having his representation be just as schizophrenic as his personality, where he's disgusting to look at, but at the same time you kind of pity him at the same time, but then it just
like
takes
yeah, I know what you mean. You get like a cat with one of its ears cut off.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If I remember, I think the first time I saw Gollum on screen, yeah, it was quite the image, no question about it. So, I'm trying to think here. What do you got?
Here's the Gollum from the cartoon. You see that?
Oh, wow.
It's like a frog.
Yep.
Oh, man, that probably doesn't... I forgot... I totally forgot we're recording a podcast. This probably doesn't make for very good audio.
No, that's okay.
That's
I think we're recording video and audio.
Yeah, we're recording both.
Oh, okay.
It was slimy and different shades of green.
Yeah. A green
big all the size. A sticky tongue.
Ew.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's see here. So if we, as a whole, with Fellowship, what are your guys' like last lingering thoughts on it? Like, what could have been done differently in the movie? Let's put it that way. Like from the book, because I have only read the first book, so I don't really remember the first book too much. But like Alister, let me ask you, like, what could the Fellowship have done better that the book did better?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, we already talked about this a little bit, but I think maybe I know it's always challenging with film to capture to really capture time, or kind of like a lapse in time, but possibly that. And we talked a little bit about the duration of time between when Gandalf was first in the Shire and when he returned. But yeah, I mean, it's I think it would have been challenging add much more without starting to sacrifice viewership, because it was already a pretty long movie, and I think that everything that they put in was really, I think, essential to each character's development. Maybe a little bit more with Frodo and Sam. I like the two of them. Maybe
get off it.
Mary. Maybe Pippin and Mary.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, leading up to when they have to separate.
Yeah. We didn't really see Pippin and Mary's characters develop until Two Towers. And I feel like there was a little bit more development of their characters in Fellowship. So maybe if anything, giving us more of an affinity for those two.
I'd say two things. The first thing is, like Alister said, they left out Tom Bombadil.
Mm-hmm.
And the one change that I found very interesting is Farmer Maggot gets reduced from someone who takes them in and hosts the hobbits, feeds them, and sends them on their way with like good blessings and equipment to
a sickle,
to a guy like heralding his tool. And so one thing I really liked about the books that I think they do well with Gandalf, but the other characters sort of get slighted, is the things they learn from conversing with people far wiser than they are. And I think anytime they take a character out or reduce a character down to nothing, I think something is lost there. Because Tom Bombadil talks about, the time long before. He's some, creature that's been around for ages and ages. The ring is like a nothing to him. He's like flipping it around like, oh, this old thing.
Right.
So but then again, to Al's point, the movie can't get much longer. So I respect the fact that they did have to reduce and conflate and cut. So then the one thing that I think would be easy to do with the time that they had is in the book, Gandalf's magic use is much more prominent throughout.
Sure.
He uses magic in the movies. His fight with Saruman is probably the most evident, where they're actually moving one another around. But other than that, he really just creates light. And I know the bridge collapses because of his incantation on the Khazad-dûm pass there. But in the book, when they're trying to get past the door, it talks about how he's unlocking the door in the mines with his magic. And I don't know. I love magic use. So I think it would have been cool to see a little bit more magic from Gandalf throughout.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Anything with more Gandalf would have worked for me. So I mean, it works. All right. So as a whole, I want to start doing something new with these. Alister, I haven't even done this yet, so I'm gonna we'll do like a 5-star rating on each movie we do. So
5.
Wow, that was that was easy. So let me ask you now: is all 3 movies gonna get 5 stars?
Yeah, from me. Yeah, from me. I mean, wow. I'm sure if I
so contently. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. No, I think I'll always have like I'm sure a couple criticisms, but nothing significant enough to detract from the fact that all 3 for me were awesome movies that I am always excited to rewatch.
So if I would have done this like out of 10, you would have said 10 out of 10 on all 3 of them too?
Oh,
that's a scale thing, right?
Yeah, you know what? Instead of the stars thing, let's do the out of 10 because we're going to narrow this down.
10. 10's across the board.
All 3?
No, I'm just teasing. Gosh.
Fairweather fan. He's taking it down a notch now.
Yeah, it ain't truly 5 stars, is it now?
Well, it's not a movie podcast until you trash the movie you're talking about.
Right. See, I'm trying to get a little bit out of you here, just a little bit. Yeah, I know these are ends.
I think I would. And you know what? Actually, I think keeps them all. If Actually, if the one factor that if it hadn't been as epic as it was, could have left them as maybe one or two of them as 9s for me was the soundtrack. But the soundtrack was so epic, and any blemishes that might have been happening as I watched, like my emotions are flying so high and free anyways because of the music that I'm completely forgiving those moments.
It's funny because remember we went to go see Rise of Skywalker. Remember when the Star Wars music came on and you're like,
you're
like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, I'm like, no matter what, you always get goosebumps.
And I still would have loved it.
Yeah.
I don't remember what movie it was, Al, but you made me sit down and listen to the soundtrack with you before we went to see the movie.
Wow, Al.
That was the coolest thing you ever did for me because then the music was not just in the background. I had heard it before and I recognized rises and falls. It was very cool. And I agree. The Lord of the Rings soundtrack is phenomenal. And if 5 means the movie was inconsequential to me and 10 means I'd watch it at any time and it changed my life, I'd give them all 3 a 10. Basically what happens when I marathon movies, because I pretty much watch them about, I don't know, every 6 months or so. I try to watch through the Lord of the Rings. And you get in a marathon mood, you put them on, you're having snacks.
Yeah.
About the time when things get sad, like Boromir's death, transitioning from the first into the second, and sometimes even as early as the Fellowship because of how heavy it is for Gandalf to realize that Frodo is going to be the one to take that burden all the way to Mordor. What happens to me is I just get sad and it lasts the whole time and I just have this emotional experience. It's great.
Yeah, you're right.
Hi, Alister.
Hey, Miss Winkler.
Look at that, sir.
Thank you. Look at that. Now I'm getting my cape. I'm getting my getting ready to go on my throne.
I'll take my coat too. Over here, please.
I can't fairly give them all 10 out of 10. I can't do that. I'm gonna have to be the one that's gonna have to be the.
Well, I'm not the connoisseur of movies that you are, Mike. I'm just a fan.
I know. I guess I'm harsher on movies than the average goer. It depends, I guess, on what it is. But if I had to rank all 3, I'm just gonna rank Fellowship right now because I'm gonna watch the other 2 extendeds and then I'll come back on the next ones and I'll give them. But I'm gonna
change mine before you do that. I'm gonna say 11.
Wow. Okay.
And then 10 for 2 Towers and 10 for Return of the King.
I'm gonna look like the bad guy here. No, I was gonna give Fellowship probably a good solid 9 out of 10. The character development really makes the movie. It's a movie that, you're waiting for those action moments, but it's a movie that doesn't need the action moments to be entertaining. The characters make everything so engaging. The world around them makes the whole movie alluring to watch. And I think I get the same feeling watching Lord of the Rings I get with Star Wars, because Alister knows how big of a Star Wars fan I am. That's my series.
For sure.
You'll never get me. That's the one series you'll never get me to say anything bad about any one of those movies, and I will never, ever, ever give any one of those movies anything less than a 10. So I know how you guys feel.
All of them.
I mean, yeah, I would give them all that because I like the universe so much. I mean, I have ones I enjoy more than others.
Sure.
But yeah, it's hard for me to say too much negative about Star Wars. So I get how you guys feel about Lord of the Rings.
I agree with Star Wars too, because I know the community doesn't love them all, and I go easy on that franchise, and I think the music does have a lot to do with that, because it just puts you in the mood to like whatever you see.
I want to ask you too, because I know The Last Jedi is the most divisive Star Wars movie now out of all 9.
Is it?
I mean, among the fan base, either you love it or you hate it. Do you like The Last Jedi?
That's 7, right?
8.
8. Oh yeah, The Force Awakens. 7. Ooh. I mean, gosh, that's a whole 30 minutes.
That is. Okay, what did you think of Rise of Skywalker? That's more recent. Let's try that.
I liked it. Good. 7, I like as a standalone. But
yeah.
I feel like the way that it fits to the rest of the series, if you talk about the final series as a momentum, it just puts up hurdles that the future films have to overcome in order to tell the story they want to tell. So instead of using when I saw The Force Awakens, I thought I saw elements that would be building blocks, and they ended up tearing them down in The Last Jedi. And I thought they recovered really well in 9. And not even that they just needed to recover. I liked all of them. I've liked all the Star Wars movies that I've seen. But when I think about the story as a whole, I don't think that 8 has the same respect for the saga as the other movies do.
I think that's true, because I look at Rise of Skywalker as being more of a sequel to Force Awakens than The Last Jedi, because it just feels like those two films are joined together, where Last Jedi feels like the ugly stepchild in the movie. It's Last Jedi is a good movie. It's just that you're right. The tone in the middle of 7 and 9, something about it does feel a little off from.
Well, in its cultural context too, I think it made some bold moves that the fan base was surprised to see, particularly the whole Rey, you're nobody.
Right.
And that was something that they had to undo with something as simple as like, I didn't lie, So yeah, so that's that.
The biggest problem I think they had with Rey, making Rey a nobody, is that it set up no shocking big revelation with her in 9. Right. It's like, what were you going to do with her in 9 if she's nobody? She had to be somebody, whether it being a Palpatine or a Kenobi or a Skywalker. She had to be somebody. So it's like, you can't just make her a nobody, because then she becomes an irrelevant character.
Yeah.
So. All right, so I guess I can't pull anything out of you like overly bad about Fellowship. So I won't try no more. Maybe as the other 2 movies go on, maybe I'll think
about it more for Two Towers and Return of the King, Mike. Maybe I'll change, but
for a movie as underrated as Fellowship is, I wouldn't dare speak a bad thing about it. I'll have plenty to say for these next 2, I'm sure.
Those are gonna be the interesting ones. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks very much for doing this, and I'm looking forward to doing the next episode on Two Towers. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Now I'm even more looking forward to it, because Dan and you is going to have some interesting comments about it. I'm going to get some negative stuff. All right.
That's good.
Yeah, I had the ambitious plans to read the book before we sat down to do this, and I didn't even start. So
that's short.
Yeah.
Sure. Cool.
Well, thanks for joining me, guys, and thanks to the audience for joining us. And we will see you on the Two Towers podcast. We'll have you guys back, and we'll do that.
Cool.
That's good.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
There is still hope. I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
Seas and mountains fall, and we come end of days. In the dark I hear a call, calling me there.
For Frodo.
I will go there, and back again.
Even the smallest